This week on Writers, Inc.
I wrote over 300 columns and essays, and during that time, it struck me again and again that so much of what I was writing about was about our travails of race in this country and the ways that people confront or avoid the issues that raises. And so I found a story which concerned voting rights, voter suppression, charges on equal law enforcement, the rise of white nationalism, the exploitation of racial anxiety by the media and by certain politicians, and also how hard it is for a black defendant to get a trial in racially controversial circumstances. I mean, all those things obviously have been suggested by, recent events. But I also see to me that race is one of America's really unresolved problems. And it runs through so many of our political discussions, whether we care to acknowledge it or not.
J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Stephen King penned Carrie in a small desk wedged between a washer and dryer. James Patterson worked in advertising and famously crafted the Toys R Us theme song long before becoming an author. Join New York Times bestseller J.D. Barker and a panel of industry powerhouses as they pull back the curtain on some of the world's most prolific authors. Where did they start? What is their process? The biggest names in publishing all have origin stories, all have tips and secrets. What does it take to consistently top the bestseller lists and become a household name? Get your notepad out. School's in session. This is Writers, Inc.
Hi, it's J. Christine Daigle.
Patrick O'Donnell.
JP Reinflush.
Just regular old Kevin Tomlinson.
And I'm JD Barker. Welcome to Writers, Inc. So question, how many of you guys watched the Apple event? Did you see this?
Oh, yeah, I watched it. All 2 hours of it or whatever.
I did too. And I should have known, I could have fast forwarded to 90% of that. But that Apple Vision Pro, how crazy was that?
Yeah.
What do you think of that? What's your actual honest interpretation of that thing?
It looks big and bulky. So a lot of this is going to depend on comfort. But honestly, I've got, I've got a monitor on my desk that I use all the time. My vision is going to crap. And I'm thinking if I had that, you can extend your Mac desktop to basically whatever you want.
Right.
So if it's as comfortable as the headphones that I've got on my head right now, I might be willing to try it. The price point is a little crazy, but it's brand.
Yeah. They're aiming at the wrong market for that price point. They're aiming, with the whole Disney Plus deal and all that stuff, they were very heavily leaning on families for that. But think about that. If you've got a family of let's say 5 people, right? $3,500 a piece, man. There's no way that's happening. But I think as creatives, I think there's a lot of potential for this thing. And that whole desk office scenario was what attracted me, because I'm well, I have a giant monitor mounted on the wall above my desk so that I can use it with my laptop. And this would replace that and make it 5 times the size. I'm willing to pay $3,500 for that.
I'm guessing hardcore gamers would probably be really into this too, right?
Yeah. So my partner has the Oculus, and they have technology that has cameras on the outside of the Oculus that will then portray the physical world and then overlap it with augmented reality. Yeah. So the whole concept that they showed that was quote unquote groundbreaking has been out for 2+ years. It's just that it hasn't had a clear camera in front of it.
Apple is very good at that. They could hold up a bottle of water and be like, we have invented this liquid. It's the greatest liquid ever. Eye water.
It's still really cool.
Twice as refreshing as regular
amazing,
water.
But...
Yeah, so I think one of the things that they could have hit on more, and I think it's probably going to go this direction, but one of the things they sort of hinted at was that you could use this like a video camera for family events and stuff and generate 3D video. And I can tell you that all those video production guys that I follow on YouTube, those content creators, are going to go nuts with that. Because just think about everything you can do if your eyes basically are the camera. They're going to do some really impressive things with that.
Yeah. The other thing that was, I thought was really cool. I'd love to see it in person. You can wear this thing on a FaceTime call or whatever, but the people that are watching you don't actually see you wearing the headset. Somehow it maps your face and creates a avatar of you, I guess.
Right. That's crazy.
What does that mean? Like, do you stop aging? Like, you have to refresh your avatar like every couple of years, or you're always, the same age as the day you bought the thing?
That's what it means for me.
I will be youthful forever.
That's what author photos are like,
It's
right?
like a whole Dorian Gray thing going on there, like your avatar takes on your age. That's the way to do it.
Well, yeah. I mean, imagine if this actually catches on, we're basically going to know the avatars of everybody that we deal with. And like, we just came back from Thriller Fest. So like, we probably wouldn't even recognize anybody because nobody is going to refresh their avatar, as often as they probably need to. You're going to have 20-year-old avatars floating around out there.
How was Thriller Fest, JD?
It was fun. It's always nice to just get to New York, and I did a lot of meeting with publishers and some work on this new book and stuff like that. But the parties were good. Attendance, I think, from what they told me, was like the second most attended Thriller Fest they've had, next to the one with George Martin. That one was pretty crazy. It's tough to tell in that hotel because it's at the Sheraton Times Square and it's divided up between 3 different floors, so you rarely see everybody all in the same spot. You basically see a lot of people in the lobby trying to figure out what floor they're supposed to go to. But I mean, in general, it was well attended. As far as I know, we didn't get any complaints, no serious problems or anything. It sounds like everybody had a good time.
So let me ask you, JD, because I can't get necessarily a straight answer on this all the time, but as far as the new incoming thriller author, would you recommend that they attend that conference?
Oh, absolutely. It's funny because it's honestly, it's the mid-listers that get kind of forgotten. ITW has a ton of programs for new authors, helping them get their debut out there, putting them in front of publishers, getting press, and just kind of building the start of their career. And they're really good at supporting the people that are at the top, but it's the ones that are in that muggy middle that kind of get forgotten. And we're working really hard on programming to try to help with that. But we've got some really cool stuff coming down. I wish I could talk about it, but we can't yet. But it's basically to help in that area.
I want to participate in that more. I want to on both sides of it. I'm going to reach out because I've got contacts there, but I want to reach out and see if I can start doing more for that conference. I've never been. It's always happened at a time where I'm booked on something else, but I'm going to do my damnedest to go next year.
Well, the support for indie authors has really increased over the last couple of years. We just changed the entry parameters so indies could have get in a little bit easier than the way they could before. A lot more programming is geared towards indies. I even noticed at the awards, a lot of the books that were nominated, the shortlist were indie published titles. So like that line's getting very blurry as well. So yeah, but a great conference. We'd love to have you, Drafted Digital, whatever you want to bring to the table.
We're going to do it. We're going to figure it out.
So Christine, you were there, weren't you?
I was there. It was fun. I hung out. It was cool. JD and I took a picture, and I'll put this on Twitter, but I ruined it with my face because, I don't know how to smile with braces. So I'm sorry, that's not going anywhere. But it was a good time. I talked to little cool people. I always like the socializing. I enjoyed it. I had a great time.
Excellent. Yeah. And I survived Cop Camp.
Oh yeah, how was Cop Camp?
Yay!
Cop Camp was fabulous. I could not say enough about the presenters and the attendees. All the questions were good. Sometimes you have some clunkers or whatever, but everybody was like super focused. They were really, really wanted to learn. And it was very eye-opening, especially when you put them in, it's called a FATS machine. That's a firearm simulator where you're in a room and there's this ginormous screen and you have a gun that shoots a laser. And there's situations that are presented in front of you and they're shoot, no shoot situations. And if you do shoot, you have to explain why you did it or why you didn't do it. So it opens a lot of eyes. It's funny how some people become Dirty Harry or Dirty Harriet really quick.
That's me. I just shoot at everything. If somebody asks me to explain, I shoot at them. Just shoot at whatever.
For directions.
Just keep shooting.
Never hang out with JD.
He's gonna light him up.
Everyone else is picturing Men in Black. You remember that in the movie? It's like you shoot the little girl with the physics textbook because what the hell?
Yeah. The bottom line is if you're the last one standing, the only person that can explain what happened is you.
Exactly.
So that's my goal.
Spoken like a thriller writer.
Yeah.
Noted.
Or a serial killer.
That was the most popular. The canine, always having a dog in there do a sniff, like finding the drugs, that kind of thing is always super popular. And the CSI stuff, people like fingerprinting stuff, learning about DNA and doing all the lab stuff. People are really into that. So yeah, I could not say enough good things about it. Honorary Corder was there, Mike Landerly. It was a lot of fun. We had a good time.
All right. JP, what's in the news?
So this first bit of news is about transformative use and derivative works and the U.S. Supreme Court agreeing with Authors Guild. So this case emerged when the Warhol Foundation had a Warhol print based off of a photograph by Lynn Goldsmith, and Lynn Goldsmith ended up suing copyright infringement. So transformative work really is about how much like a character or something in that message is changed from its original work. And the court's decision clarifies that transformative use is not the ultimate determinant under the first factor of fair use, and it should be balanced against the commercial nature of the use. I think this was just an interesting bit of news that comes out that kind of helps clarify some of the bits between derivative works and how to safeguard authors.
Yeah, so this is gonna come up when the Supreme Court is looking at AI generated images. It's going to be a key player, I think.
Take your shot.
Yeah, take the shot. I think it tells you which way the courts are leaning, right? To a certain extent, it kind of gives you a little crystal ball into where this is all going. Again, totally steering clear of it. I will tell you, I have used AI for other things. And full disclosure here, I taught a masterclass at Thriller Fest, and we took a writing sample that was written in past tense and asked ChatGPT to switch it to present tense, and it did it on the fly.
Very nice.
Yeah, and it was also able to create a screenplay from that same text. Which I thought was pretty impressive. The other thing that I used it for, I had one particular author that their dialogue was just very clunky. It was very difficult to tell who was actually saying what. So we asked ChatGPT to just remove everything other than dialogue. And the cool thing about doing that is it gives you the character name, a colon, and whatever it is they say after it. So if you know who is supposed to be saying what, if you get that incorrect, ChatGPT gets it incorrect. So you can basically spot those kind of errors. For that type of thing, I think it's fantastic. It's the creative side where I still think it's lacking. But who knows where it's going to go. But again, I mean, based on this court case, though, I'd be very careful about what you do with the output.
The first thing I want to say, by the way, is Christine, please don't tell JD to take a shot. He just told us he's shooting everybody. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead, Christine.
Oh, I was just going to say that I agree with you about the AI. So for anyone who's not familiar with the case, it was a photograph of Prince, and Andy Warhol made it orange and called it Orange Prince. And so looking at this, if they're saying, transformative use doesn't cover derivative work, meaning that Warhol didn't transform this enough to not be derivative of Goldsmith's work, then looking at AI, wouldn't that be the same for all copyrighted works that are used to train AI? So that's something that's going to need to be looked at. And then if we're taking that into writing, Goldsmith didn't consent and wasn't compensated, then wouldn't all copyrighted works that are used in AI processes be in the same boat? So or would it have to be more transformative? So that's where the sticking points are going to be, I think.
But you have to look at the end result, right? Because we already have laws about taking someone's writing and not transforming it enough. It's called plagiarism, and we already protect against that. I don't see how, for me, the sticking point is always, if you're feeding this content in and using it to train the AI to do this, you're not copying it. Now, there could be an argument about distribution, which is kind of where things are falling for my side of the world. But that also comes down to how was the work acquired? What was the ultimate end product of the thing? And it's just not going to be as simple as that. This isn't going to solve that either. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. Sort of, I'm kind of cringing about where it's going to go, but yeah, I don't see it as transformative, or I see it as more transformative than derivative when it comes to AI.
Well, there's two different issues here. There's what Christine just talked about, basically what the AI was trained on, and which was existing images. There's also the output. A lot of people feel that if they take an image generated by Midjourney and they alter it enough, that now it's their own product. And this is also playing into that. So from both sides, I think it's basically shooting those options down. That doesn't mean it's going to stay that way, but at least here in the U.S., it looks like that's where the courts are leaning.
Do you feel like that's more protective of the artist, though, that like you can't have someone else being derivative of your work? Like you can be derivative of your own work, but I do feel like that is more protective to artists, or that's the way that I read it anyway.
I'm on the fence about it because, like my daughter is in school right now. She's being trained. She's being taught using textbooks and images and, existing product that was created by other people. That's how her brain is being trained. And we trained the AI basically the same way. So from that standpoint, I don't know how you get around that. But I think the real issue there is the AI is capable of duplicating something 100%. Rather it being like just a recalled memory. If I put a picture in front of my daughter and I ask her to paint that picture, she's not going to paint the same picture. She's going to create something different. The AI can create it 100%.
Well, what if you have an eidetic memory?
Maybe. I don't know. I used to have one of those and my brain is getting so cluttered. I feel like I need a good defrag.
I mean, this is, I've said all I'm going to say. Let's just move on. Yeah. Next topic.
Because
this could go on for a while.
On next episode of Writers Inc.
Next up in the news, Scribe Media in turmoil. So Scribe Media, originally known as Book in a Box, abruptly laid off its entire staff of 87 in May due to unforeseen business circumstances. So ultimately, this is just something that, showed up and people ended up getting laid off pretty quickly. Just some bit of news for people to be aware of if they're involved with this at all.
Yeah.
I love Book in a Box. But I mean, the business model itself, it just seems expensive. Taking a box and mailing books, that's heavy. It's going to cost you a lot of money to do it. You've got to get product from somewhere. Even with the publishers donating those books, it's a tricky business model to get out there. I mean, I think it was basically similar to like the Book of the Month Club. They used to mail you a book every month, that kind of thing. There's another one similar to this where you can, as a publisher, you can pay to have your books put in into hotel rooms. So like every guest checking in a particular night gets a copy of your book. Is that effective? I don't know. I mean, if it's costing you $5 to $10 for every one of those prints and they're, charging you $5 to $10 to put each one in a room, but it's, that's been going on for a while. So, I think on some level it must be working.
Yeah.
Last up in the news, Amazon KDP rolls out major changes in book category selection. So we originally had heard about the changes in pricing for print, and now we're kind of seeing some additional changes within the KDP platform in which authors can choose only 3 categories for their books. It's on a system that's in the editing of book details, and it allows for age range selections a little bit more than they had previous access to, and you can no longer email Amazon to adjust the categories. Now, I've use this on my own. It's a pretty straightforward process and you can actually edit it anytime you want. But to get yourself into those 3 categories, it's also only explicit to whatever form you're using. So ebook and paperback would have 3 separate ones. But yeah.
And I'm fine with this as long as they include all the categories, which traditionally in the past they didn't. So you had to go through the whole customer support rigmarole just to get your book into the right category.
I was able to find the top categories I wanted, which were pretty drilled down. So I felt like I was able to find the categories I wanted. Hopefully others will too.
I was just wondering if anyone used Publisher Rocket, because that's usually you'd find your categories.
Yeah.
And is it?
Yeah, I love Publisher Rocket. Yep.
That's what I did.
Okay.
I honestly, I think all this stuff is going away. I don't want to throw AI out there again, but yeah, I mean, because Amazon's got the ability to basically, we upload our entire book, right? So they've got the entire text. We're at the point tech-wise where, AIs or other hardware can basically analyze everything in that book and place it in the correct category. Because authors really, some authors have it dialed in. They know where they're supposed to be. Other authors, they list their favorite authors' books and they kind of try to target those people, those markets. And it may not be spot on with what they're actually writing. I think Amazon needs to use a solid algorithm and kind of take it out of the author's hands altogether, tie it into the search, and they've got the ability to really drill down and actually get it right. I would have hated to have been the person who was on the receiving end of all those emails too, because every author uploads their book, they choose the categories that are there, and then they blast them an email of, no, put it in this one and this one and this one, these 500, and that all to me seems like a waste of time. It's metadata from 5 years ago. Like this will go away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This episode is brought to you by AutoCrit. One of the most value-packed memberships for any author, AutoCrit brings you an amazing suite of tools that make it a breeze to plan, write, and edit your books all in one place. AutoCrit takes you far above standard grammar checking or cookie cutter guidance. Instead, it's like having an experienced editor in your genre watching over your shoulder to help you deliver great writing that keeps your audience trapped in the story. You can even compare your writing style to more than 100 best-selling authors right down to the word level, so you can see what the best in the business do to keep their storytelling clean, clear, and crisp. Listeners of the Writers Inc. podcast can now take advantage of lifetime membership for one single fee. That's right, no renewal fees.
Hi, this is JD Barker. I've used AutoCrit for years, and not only has it improved my writing, but it's been a crucial tool with aspiring authors that I've mentored. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just beginning, it'll help you find your weak spots and weed them out. Give it a shot with your latest project. Trust me, your editor will thank you.
Head to autocrit.com/JD to get your lifetime membership. Big thanks to AutoCrit for sponsoring the show.
So, JD, who's up this week?
This week, we've got Richard North Patterson. He's the New York Times bestselling author of 22 novels, a trial lawyer in his past life. His latest book is actually called Trial and releases June 13th. So here he is, Richard North Patterson.
I interview a lot of authors, and it's not every day I get to talk to an author whose work I've been reading for decades. So thank you for agreeing to chat with us.
Well, thank you. And you don't look nearly old enough to have been reading me for decades, but you're doing well.
I get that a lot. Yeah. I'm actually 97 years old.
That's remarkable. Well, you owe Medicare a lot.
Yes, I do. Yeah, no, actually, I think the first book I read of yours was maybe Silent Witness, I think.
Okay.
So I don't know if that dates me or not, but that's...
Well, it throws you back about 27 years.
There you go. Yeah. So that's technically decades.
Yeah.
So, well, now we're here today. Now you've got a new book out, and we definitely want to talk about that. In fact, we can jump right into talking about it, and there's some interesting things kind of associated with it. If you're willing to chat about that stuff as well, but
sure.
Your new book is called Trial. You want to give us a little rundown of what Trial is about?
Yeah, sure. Trial stems from the arrest and ultimately the trial of a black 18-year-old voting rights worker for the fatal shooting of a white sheriff's deputy after a nighttime traffic stop in rural Georgia. And it culminates in a nationally televised murder trial, which is, to say the least, racially charged.
Yeah.
But it also involves the revival of the love between his mother, a black voting rights leader, and his father, a white congressman from Georgia from Massachusetts, didn't know he existed, and how they deal with each other and how the father and son discover each other in the vortex of this incredibly stressful and demanding trial.
It doesn't take much to figure out what the inspirations were for this one. I mean, this is one of those ripped from the headlines type stories. How influential has the past 3 years been on this book?
Well, a lot. Actually, we can go back to 2015 when I started writing political columns for national publications. I wrote over 300 columns and essays. And during that time, Kevin, it struck me again and again that so much of what I was writing about was about our travails of race in this country, right, and the ways that people confront or avoid the issues that raises. And so I found a story which concerned, voting rights, voter suppression, charges on equal law enforcement, the rise of white nationalism, the exploitation of racial anxiety by the media, and by certain politicians, and also how hard it is for a black defendant to get a trial in racially controversial circumstances. I mean, all those things obviously have been suggested by, recent events. But I also see to me that race is one of America's really unresolved problems. It runs through so many of our political discussions, whether we care to acknowledge it or not.
Yeah, I grew up in a world thinking that racism had been conquered, honestly, and it's been eye-opening in the past, I'd say decade at least, to see that just how wrong that assumption was.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm a white guy writing about problems which should concern us all, but primarily affect non-white people. And I'm writing from the perspective of three characters, two of whom are black. Mm-hmm. And when you undertake that kind of effort, you really have to go and talk to the people who have experienced it directly and go to the places they live. So I went to rural Georgia, and I interviewed over 50 people, many of them black, ministers, civil rights and voting rights leaders, judges, law enforcement officers, civic leaders, politicians, to get their perspective. And if I could go on about this a little bit more, Kevin, the particular challenge to write Allie Hill, who is one of the two central characters, the black voting rights leader, for a white guy to write about a black woman, you've certainly got to really try to figure your way into her life and her heart. And I did that in several ways. I mean, I interviewed all these folks in Georgia, which is the place in my book where she comes from. I interviewed black moms about their anxieties and how they try to protect their sons. And this is very much a part of the story because her son's on trial for murder. I interviewed the successor of Stacey Abrams, of Georgia's leading leader of Georgia's principal voting rights group, the New Georgia Project, about the professional, also the personal realities of her life, particularly the constant danger of violence that she lives under. I mean, she had websites putting up her picture and telling people where to go find her. So, I wouldn't have known about those realities without going to Georgia. And then finally, because I have her going to Harvard in the spring of 2003 as part of my narrative, I interviewed three black women who went to Harvard about that time and asked them about what their experiences were like in as much detail as I could and what they make of that experience now. And so I really did my best to capture what it's like to be her. And that's the exercise of a fiction writer. You have to use your imagination and your empathy to create a world and create the characters who live in that world.
You actually, you wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal about the challenges of actually getting this book picked up, the stuff that came your way as a sort of challenge to whether or not you even had the right to tell this story. What was some of that like? I mean, what was the first obstacle you ran across?
Well, the first obstacle was knowing there would be one, because, well before I decided to write Trial, which was in the spring of 2021, Zadie Smith, the prominent Afro-British novelist, had written disparagingly of the efforts to keep authors confined to writing about their own identity as opposed to crossing the lines of identity. I mean, it's a brilliant, eloquent essay which ran the New York Times Book Review. And then there was, which I'm sure all your listeners know about, the case of Jeanine Cummins and American Dirt, where a mostly white author wrote about a Mexican woman and her son trying to cross the border. And after initially very good reviews, she was castigated for daring to write outside her identity. Her book tour was canceled. She went and basically became a semi-recluse in the face of an avalanche of criticism. And were that not enough, my agents, who were wonderful agents, told me, "You're going to have a terrible time with this book.
Yeah.
And when I turned it in, they said, "This is a great book, but you're going to have a terrible time with this book because there's a fashion now in publishing that only that white authors cannot write about problems that primarily affect non-whites and from
Yeah.
the perspective of non-whites, which is antithetical to the whole spirit of what creativity is in fiction, but also the spirit of empathy and imagination we should employ in our social and political spheres as well. And if we hunker down into sort of ethnic neighborhoods where people are only writing about subjects which they were born into, it's going to be a very impoverished literature.
Yeah, I would actually argue that it's sort of the job of a writer to try to get into these perspectives that are outside your own, right? I mean, I write about characters that I don't share their identity culturally or their gender or anything. And it helps me to understand them better. Is that sort of
it's almost impossible not to write about somebody different than you. I mean, as I said in the Wall Street Journal, if you think about it, you spend your life trying to understand people who are not like you, starting with members of your family, and going outside to the diverse populace that we have in this country. And it's antithetical to the use of the imagination, which is what we all do in fiction, to say, well, you can no longer imagine anyone who isn't, quote, like you. First of all, it's impossible because nobody's like you.
Right.
And second of all, we should be able to imagine across the lines of identity. We simply have to do our homework to do it with authenticity and empathy, as opposed to just sort of like, donning an identity that you've never really thought about.
Right.
But, the assumption, Kevin, that authorship is authenticated by having identity the same as your character or characters denies every other engine of good fiction, whether it's empathy, imagination in particular, also the ability to write dialogue, to create a setting, to tell a dramatic story, to employ the psychological acuity necessary to to understand different characters and put the readers in the heads of those characters, and if necessary, to perform the research which informs that entire effort. Yeah. So, what's funny is to have publishers employ a criteria which is so completely deaf to what literature is and what makes good fiction. It's kind of astounding.
Yeah. Do you think it's a sort of, I don't know, is it somewhat lazy? I mean, that's the way it feels to me. Like it's easier to say, we just won't look at books, written in this way. We won't look at characters written by someone who isn't of that group.
Well, it's incredibly lazy, and it's also preemptive censorship because, not one person has told me this book is in any way racially insensitive or obtuse. The problem is not the context of the book. The problem is that I chose to write it.
Yeah.
As a white author. But if you think about it, okay, so take, say, Anna Karenina by Tolstoy or Madame Bovary by Flaubert. Are they of no value because they were written by men about a primary character who's a woman? I mean, obviously not. So, and if you look back at fiction, for 200 years or more, people have been writing novels of social realism. Dickens did.
Yeah.
Tom Wolfe did. Upton Sinclair did. And these were white people of their time who nonetheless chose to do the journalistic work necessary to understand people who did not walk in their shoes. In Dickens's case, working class in impoverished England, for example, and ask their readers to imagine themselves as having these lives instead of the lives that they in reality had. I mean, it's called social realism, and I've always been a big fan of that. I don't compare myself to Dickens or Tom Wolfe, obviously. That's not the point. But the point is that a rich vein of fiction has involved exploring political and social issues and social conditions in a way that exposes those conditions. I mean, it's a very valuable strain of fiction. And basically what these folks in New York were saying is you cannot do that anymore if your exploration involves people of a different racial identity than you. Here's the irony. I was saying before, I interviewed roughly 50 people, a lot of people in rural Georgia, a lot of black people in rural Georgia. So it's a mortal lock that the white publishers in New York who said I couldn't do this know almost nothing at firsthand about the experiences those folks shared from their own life. And yet they propose to be the literary benefactors of Black America. It's a terribly obtuse and self-flattering, and I think utterly benighted way of looking at their obligations as publishers.
So you now you talked a bit about you do a lot of interviewing, you do a lot of your research basically is all taking that sort of approach. I kind of want to dive into that approach. Like, what is your research process like from beginning to end on a book?
Well, I'll start, at the very beginning. I'll sit around and I'll think about what I might want to write about until I come up with the idea in the very general outline of a story that I might want to tell, which immediately exposes to me all the ways in which I'm not prepared to write that story and all the things that I don't know that I need to know in order to write it. And that becomes the basis for the research phase. And typically what I'll do is I will track down people any way I can. I had friends in Georgia connecting with other friends in Georgia and so on and so forth before I found the people I interviewed with. And then I'll send them a short outline of the stories I conceive it and a list of the questions that I imagine talking to them about, so I'm not wasting their time. And I'll go and sit down with them and learn everything I can about what they have to tell me. And people are generally very nice about it. If they think you're sincere, they want to help you get it right. My late friend Pat Conroy once said that fiction is where I go to tell the truth. And sometimes it involves telling the truths of what has happened to other people.
Yes. I love that quote, by the way. And that's the way I've always perceived fiction. I feel like over the years, I've actually learned more about the way the world works from fiction than I have from nonfiction sources, and especially the media.
Well, it really is true because, if you're a journalist, and I've been in that business to the extent I've been a political commentator, you can't know what it's like to be Ron DeSantis,
right,
or John McCain or Ted Kennedy. But if you're a fiction writer, you can imagine what it is to be a person like them.
Right.
And if you can make an educated guess about what their internal workings might be. So in a way, you can explore things on a deeper level than you can in nonfiction, and certainly in journalism.
Yeah. I see a table with stacks of papers behind you. Is that sort of part of your process to?
Yeah, I mean, it's not nearly as discouraging as the pile of papers when I'm actually writing a novel. I mean, I will. The thing I didn't say is after the interviews, I'll pull it all together and I'll have a file folder for each chapter or scene in the book from beginning to end, with the notes of the interviews and an outline of how I think that scene ought to go. So when I show up in the morning, I'm not thinking, well, what do I do next? Because I know now the writing can be lousy and I may have to go back and fix it, but the writing at least exists. I mean, I'm getting something down that I can work with. And I'm not constantly saying, well, what now?
So
I think, I outline, you have to know how the book ends for two reasons. First of all, so that the events actually make sense.
Right.
But also the behaviors of the characters make psychological sense.
Yeah.
So to me, the ending always resonates back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And, you have to have the credibility of having a narrative which doesn't go off the rails. I mean, you don't the last minute you want to have the housekeeper become a serial killer just to wrap up the book, you know.
Yeah, that's sort of a Deus Ex Machina kind of.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like I should point out, because I called it out, but like for the listener, the table full of papers is not like a disorderly stack. It's actually quite neat and orderly.
Well,
I don't want to give a false impression.
No, I used to be a lawyer, and that's a discouraging enough business without coming into a messy desk. So I always made sure that the stacks were at least clean. I had a little to-do list to remind me what I was supposed to do the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, congratulations. I've worked for a few lawyers in my time, and they were not as dedicated to keeping things as neat as me.
Yeah. Well, I know, but chaos is not helpful.
That's true. So what are you, do you write by hand? Are you a handwriting author?
I used to write by hand, and it always felt great. And then I would fax it to my sister, my assistant, and it would come back typed. And it was already such an improvement over my handwriting. I felt really uplifted by the whole thing. But finally, when they had a voice recognition software which actually worked, I found that I could dictate. And what that did is I could see my words on the screen as I went. I'm also speaking my dialogue aloud and listening to it. And so then you can edit as you go. And so I found that telling a story literally worked as well. So either of those is fine. I never did learn to type, which is sad. So
yeah, I can't imagine writing any. I type. That's what I do. I've tried. I've got friends who have.
You and every other normal human being. And then
I don't know how normal it is now, though. No, I know so many authors who are using dictation to write their books, and just feels so unnatural to me that I can't ever get past the first couple of pages. So I'm going to have to try, though. If you're doing it, I got to give it a shot.
Well, my feeling is like whatever works for you, don't screw around with it.
Right. But the whole carpal tunnel thing starts to set in. So So what's the timeline for because and I guess we could include the time that it takes to research in this, since that is a big part of your process. But from beginning to end, like how long does it usually take you?
Well, it really depends on the book. I mean, I wrote a very long book about the Israeli-Palestinian tragedy, which involved going to the West Bank and Israel. That took me, a year plus. Other books where the research is less extensive and maybe the story is more compact, 9 months. But that's every day, 5 days a week, morning to night. And so, I mean, I'm like a civil servant. I show up before 9 and I don't leave until the martini at 5:30.
Yeah. Oh, you wait all the way to 5:30 for your martinis. All right.
Yeah. Well, it's a challenge, but
some days more than others. Well, that 9 months, I think that's a really, for the type of book that you're writing and the amount of work that you're putting into that seems like a fast pace. That's, a lot of authors will take more than a year to do a book like that. Well,
I'm fortunate in that I am not at a loss for words generally. It's just a matter of, I'll spend the first half of the day writing and the second half of the day revising. And making sure that I've got a copy that is clean as I know how to make it at the time. Then I'll go back and look at it, later on from the perspective of time to look at both the sentences, but also the overall structure, and what doesn't need to be there that is there.
Are you pretty brutal as an editor when you go back?
Yeah, I tend to be pretty self-critical. I mean, somebody said to me early on in my career, you have to learn how to slaughter your babies. And you just really do. You can't get sentimental about every well-turned sentence or every scene you think is great. It's really got to serve the whole.
Yeah. Do you keep them? Do you keep the stuff you cut so you can use it later?
No, after I finish a book, I mean, it's as you know, writing is an exhausting process. I don't look at them for a while, but then the funniest thing, about 10 years later, I'll pick up a book I've written. It's like it was written by somebody else. I'll think, really, this guy's not so bad. It's funny.
Do you like it though when you read it? Are you enjoying it?
I generally do. And in fact, I'm always pleasantly surprised.
Well, you shouldn't be. You've earned your stripes in this.
Yeah.
How much has because you do political commentary, you've worked in journalism now. How much does that influence the work and the process of what you're doing?
Well, I think I've always had a journalistic approach. I mean, when I was a lawyer, I interviewed witnesses. I cross-examined people. I investigated things. I learned stuff I had to learn. I mean, and when I was a lawyer, I ended up defending shareholder suits, very often involving pretty complicated Silicon Valley enterprises.
Yeah.
And that involved learning things about business I didn't know. So that investigative, interrogative approach really came from practicing law. And then I applied it to fiction. And of course, it's also, a component of good journalism, which I eventually, sort of came to. But I have always had a journalistic approach to fiction. I really think that when you're writing about something, it needs to be reality based, and I'm pretty scrupulous about that. I remember the first time I went to the West Wing of the White House, and I realized how small those offices are.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like a rabbit warren, except for the Oval Office, which looks pretty good. I mean, the conditions most of those people work in it isn't great. I looked at the West Wing on television. It's like this vast sort of television set, and they're walking
it's got that
by each other.
And
I could never watch again.
Yeah,
because that just was, that was a West Wing in somebody's imagination, but it had nothing to do with reality at all.
Yeah. So that ruined it for you. You can't divorce yourself from that. Right?
Well, most lawyers, you've heard this, I'm sure, they can't stand, dramatizations, of lawyers and television. It's just so. I mean, I remember watching Paul Newman's cross-examination, the verdict. Yeah. I thought, are you kidding me? You would have been disbarred years ago.
And that was one of yours, right?
It was not one of mine.
Oh, no. Never mind. I'm sorry. I apologize. Yeah. I'm thinking.
No.
You've got a lot of titles, but that wasn't one of them.
No, it wasn't.
So, well, that's it. Have you, you have had some things adapted though. What did you think? Because I think Silent Witness was a series on TNT.
Well, Silent Witness, I thought they did a good job. Okay. I also sold a miniseries which combined A Degree of Guilt and sequels, Eyes of a Child. And Eyes of a Child concerned the allegation and ultimately the reality of child sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's no way to understand that book without that. And the last minute, Standards and Practices, NBC decided, well, that we couldn't have that in the book, so they completely gutted in the movie, completely gutted the script, and it just sort of made very little sense. So, that was one of my first experiences with censorship.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that they hadn't done stuff like that before, but in 1993, newly politically sensitive, they decided they couldn't have that on TV.
Yeah.
So, I'm a big fan of creative freedom, as I imagine many of us are. And I think if you do the work responsibly and respectfully, you ought to be able to avoid the censor's hatchet.
Yeah. Mostly. I mean, I feel like there's so many. You just don't know the rules anymore. The rules change.
Well, I don't think kids. I don't think kids should read or watch inappropriate stuff. But I certainly don't think To Kill a Mockingbird, it should be kept away from 14-year-olds.
I agree. it was a very influential book for me at around that age. So,
Yeah.
All right. So we're gonna have to wrap up, but I wanted to ask one final question. This one's more of a general question I ask a lot of authors, but for you, I decided that I wanted to ask you, what happens when you get to the middle of the book, you reach what they call the muddy middle? Or perhaps you don't ever hit this, but that point at which you have more story to tell, but you've lost steam in the middle of the book. What is your process for getting past that?
Well, this is going to sound so terrible. It just never happens.
Okay.
And the reason it never happens is because I have this process where the book is so carefully outlined, as I say, literally a folder for every scene, that I've thought about the architecture of the novel very carefully. So it's not muddy to me because I know what's happening. I'm in control of the process. It's really an act of self-defense against exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about. I know wonderful authors who have gotten stuck or who have thrown out 200 pages because they decided it didn't go anywhere. Right. And it doesn't detract from their achievement at all. The books ultimately are great, but I will never be stuck with that problem.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear, because I want to see more books from you in the future.
Well, bless you. Bless you. If I were stuck with that problem, it would require more martinis than I could probably consume.
Well, we all have our burdens and challenges.
Don't we though, Kevin?
All right. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us about this. The book is out soon. It's on pre-order now.
June 13. I should also say that if you go to richardnorthpatterson.substack.com, you can read excerpts, because one of the challenges I've undertaken is say, okay, there were people who said I should have written this book. Here's the book. What do you think? And so roughly half the book is going to be on Substack, and then the whole book comes out on June 13th.
Hey there, it's Christine Daigle
and JP Reinflush,
and we want to tell you about our wonderful sponsor, Master Writer.
Master Writer is a powerful collection of writing tools and reference assembled in one easy-to-use program. Included are word families, phrases, synonyms, rhymes, definitions, figures of speech, pop culture, and searchable Bible and intensifiers, a unique collection of intense descriptive words. Why struggle to find the right word when you can have all the possibilities in an instant?
Well, a computer can't compete with the mind and imagination of a writer. The mind can't compete with the word choices that Master Writer will give you in an instant. When the two work together, great things happen. Check it out today at masterwriter.com.
So, I have a question for you guys. How do you deal with the muddy middle? Or do you have the muddy? Maybe I'm the only one here who experiences that.
I think everybody does. It's less of a problem when you've got a solid outline, because you work those issues out before you actually get there. But we had Patterson on the show before, James Patterson, and he talked about this, and he said, good writers can create a beginning and an end. Incredible writers create the middle. It's the hardest part of the book to write, because you basically get your hook out there at the beginning, and now you've got 200 and 300 pages or whatever you've got to squeeze out in between that your fantastic ending to keep everybody reading along.
Yeah. Other than drinking, though, like what's your cure?
I think changing the scenery yourself, go for a walk, go on your motorcycle and ride, maybe start writing some of that in a coffee shop or a different location. Just change it up. Or what I've done too is if I'm typing, maybe I'll start dictating. And that kind of uses a different part of the brain.
Change the means. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. For me, I like to plan out my novels a bit ahead of time, and I like using theme as like a argument or a statement, and that really helps me decide what my middle is going to look like before I get there. So I don't know if I necessarily have a muddy middle per se, because I plan things out.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I don't know that I think about this consciously anymore, but when I used to be thinking about structure, if you're looking at Save the Cat, they call it Fun and Games, or Hero's Journey, Test and Trial. I kind of think, because the middle is the biggest, right? Your first act is a quarter and your last act is a quarter and the middle is like 50%. I try and break it into like an act 2A and 2B and kind of have that changeover in the moment, some kind of change or mirror moment or something big that happens that you're working towards. So it feels like tighter. I know some people don't write it that way. They'll write like just 3 acts and make them all kind of the same way. But for me, just kind of thinking about what's the switch, what's the change in my character here or my story, that kind of helps me get through it. Yeah.
I started with that question because it was the lighter question, but so next up is the one I think is the one that's going to be interesting. So, and that is, should writers write from the POV of a group that they do not represent?
Yes.
I feel like that's all I do is write.
It's this crazy cycle. Like I don't understand where this is really coming from. To me, writing a book, making a TV show, making a movie, writing a song, these are all just ways to tell a story. It's from the perspective of the person who is telling it. If they get out there and they want to write about a minority, they want to get in a minority person's head. As long as they research that properly and do it well, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to do it. I mean, you touched on this in the interview. I think if we were all forced not to do that, if I was forced to write every single book about middle-aged white guys, it creates 2 problems. First of all, those books are going to be very boring. And the overall problem, which is, why are we still thinking of each other as this and as that and as this color and this race and that race? I mean, the fact that we're still doing that will never go away as long as we create those markets. I saw a meme not too long ago, like Black Entertainment Network, BET, has been around forever. Yeah, if somebody were to come up with White Entertainment Network and put it out there tomorrow, people would be up in the air about it.
But mostly because it would be wet. I think most people would object to that.
But the point is, like, as long as these labels exist, as long as the labels keep getting thrown around, the problem never actually goes away.
Yeah, I agree.
I think for me, from my personal perspective, I think writing the other, whomever that is, totally, I think everyone should always be inclusive and diverse in their cast, whomever is that primary character. But I think when it comes to struggles that are related to a group of people that you are either like that you can't relate to, or that you don't have that correlation to, or you just don't have that lived experience, that's where it gets really difficult. If I read a really good coming out story and then I discovered that it was from someone who was like completely straight and had no relation to that and just didn't actually feel it, I don't know if I would feel comfortable. I would almost feel a little cheated because I feel like I was relating to that author, and then to discover that there was no relation would be awkward.
But doesn't that mean that they did their job well? Like if you liked it to begin with and then learned that?
Right. This is where it gets muddy. Like, I don't know, but it feels strange. But like if I read an awesome queer character from anybody, props, super happy about that. But it's just like those little struggle moments. That's where I'm muddy about.
It seems like, though, that I always flip it, right? Because we've had plenty of books and films and, characters who were straight that were either being written or portrayed by gay people. And I don't question that at all. So this is one of those weird things where I don't understand. I don't necessarily consider it a double standard or anything. It's just, it is different for some reason, but I don't know why. And so that's part of why I would want to write a character like that, though. Yeah.
Well,
yeah. It's very.
Have you ever? I think we need to look at that from multiple perspectives, right? Because I think we need to be very careful about artistic censorship, because I don't think that's good. I think you should be able to write what you want to write, as long as you do your due diligence and your research, and you are willing to take responsibility from what you've written and any consequences that may come from that. That's from the author perspective, right? But then there's also the publisher's perspective. What voices are they going to publish? Mm-hmm. There's a consumer perspective. What do you want to open your wallet for? And all of these kind of come together, right? And I think, I don't know, for me, and this is just opinion, we talk about this off air a lot, that, we're not really political. We want to talk about craft and business. So I don't want to get political on any of this. But I do think that there is a difference writing a non-oppressed perspective versus an oppressed perspective and writing that struggle. So, I don't want to get too into the weeds in this. I just think you need to take care and really think about why you are wanting to write that book and that struggle.
I'm just going to put this out there because I've actually been on the flip side of this too. I've had large cast books that I've written before. So let's say a police department and I pick a particular city. And I've gotten pushback from the publishers because I didn't include certain minorities in that particular cast. And they wanted me to.
Well, I think
it's similar to watching a Well, you should, if it makes sense. I mean, the way I look at it is if I write, let's say I do Detroit PD, what I'm going to do is actually go out there and look at the makeup of Detroit PD at whatever particular date the story actually takes place. So if it's X percentage, this race, X percentage, this minority, whatever, that's what I'm going to represent. But publishers will push back on you and ask you to include this, include that, just for the sake of inclusion. And that's wrong too. Like that's why I think all this stuff to me is just is total nonsense. I think we just need to tell the story the way it needs to be told. If a group needs to be represented, they should be. Just make sure you represent them properly. Make sure you research it and you get it right.
So you have inadvertently segued into my next question, JD, which was, do you ever interview people or embed yourself in a scenario as part of your research for a book? Apparently you do.
Oh, I speak to a lot of cops. I'm that guy who went to prisons and talked to serial killers to try and get in their heads. I've talked to psychologists. I've talked to the people that work with those people just to try to get a well-rounded, knowledge base before actually diving in for the same reasons we just talked about, just to make sure I get it right. The same reason, Mr. Patterson was talking about it. Get it right.
Yeah.
I think you have to.
I talked to Patrick.
Yeah, well, there we go. If you want to talk to me, so is JD. But at Cop Camp, we had Annie Schwartz. She was the reporter who broke the Jeffrey Dahmer story, and she spoke with him a number of times. It's like, she's at the newspaper, and it's like Jeffrey Dahmer, line 2. He was trying to call her from prison. So obviously when she wrote her book, she had more than doing due diligence, for that.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends in the police force. My father was a police officer. I have a lot of friends in the FBI. So, tapping into those resources has been very helpful for me on the thriller side, which is fun because when I first started, I wrote sci-fi and fantasy and didn't have very many of those kind of references. But I think anytime that you can talk to these people, first of all, there are entire divisions of the FBI that are dedicated to talking to people creating content that involves the FBI, because what they want to do is correct the record. They want accuracy. They don't want to have to continuously fight the fantasy of what the FBI is. They want to portray the organization in the right light. So they'll actually talk to you. They'll send you materials. They've got a whole bunch of stuff, and you can even get on the phone with people. There was a quote that came up in the interview from Pat Conroy, which was, "Fiction is where I go to tell the truth." And I'm curious how everyone thinks of that quote.
You know what? That really connected with me. Being a sci-fi writer, right?
Yeah.
Like, so that's where often the truth is told in fiction, and it's like big issues, big social issues, political issues. And we tell it in fiction. I think it was Neil Gaiman that said, the worlds that he writes are like truer than this one. And I think that is sometimes very true. So definitely that quote connected for me.
I like that quote, but I'll put this caveat that there's definitely a difference between fiction and truth. And oftentimes people see fiction as truth or what they wish the truth actually was, or what they hope, the truth actually is. And sometimes those lines get blurred, and people actually going down this rabbit hole of, oh yeah, it must be that way because it was on the screen or, whatever, or in a book.
That's a good point, because truth is subjective, right? Yeah, truth is subjective. So I guess it's like the artist's truth, right? And you have to decide how that connects with you individually.
Yep.
All right. So, JD, who's up next week?
Next week, we've got New York Times bestseller Riley Sager coming back. I think it's his third time. I'm going to have to go back and look. His latest book is called The Only One Left and releases June 20th. So he's going to tell us all about it. Riley Sager.
Sounds great. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.